No right to hold me here. Try passing looks in the line, Laurie.
We're trying to help you.
This is for your own good.
What do you want from me?
Your compliance would be a start.
He fed the lost alien sisters. 15 years later, they returned as warriors to claim him as their bondmate. The beacon said no life could survive here, but then he saw the children, eyes glowing like stars, waiting for someone who would not walk away. The frontier was not made for softness. Ronan Hale knew that better than anyone. Vadris 9 spun like a broken jewel in the edge of human map space, an unforgiving world of red storms, dust plains, and crystalline ridges that could slice a man's boots open in a single misstep. Most colonists had abandoned the outpost years ago when the mining corporations pulled their drills and moved on. But Ronan stayed. Why? He told himself it was stubbornness, or maybe just not having anywhere else to go. The truth was simpler. Survival here gave him purpose. Out here there were no endless city laws, no dead officers at the door, no empty condolences for the family he had lost. Just the land, the wind, and the constant test of whether a human could bend a hostile world to his will. His shelter, a low steel and polycrete module he'd patched together from scavenged parts, sat in the shadow of a ridge where an underground spring surfaced just enough to keep him alive. The condenser towers rattled in the wind, pulling moisture from the air, while his single goat analog creature bleated inside its pen. He had tools, rations, a rifle that fired magnetized shards, and not much else. Most days he was alone. He preferred it that way. But that evening, everything changed. The storm had broken earlier than forecast. Shards of crimson lightning crawled across the horizon as he trudged back from the water trench, cursing at the stubborn hose that kept leaking. The sun had already dipped behind the crystalline hills, leaving the air sharp with static. He carried only a lamp and the worn blade at his hip, his rifle stowed back at the shelter. He didn't expect company. Until he saw movement near the rocks. Ronan froze. At first he thought it was the mirage trick of lightning, red shadows bending into shapes that weren't there. But then he saw them clearly. Two small figures crouched beneath the overhang of fractured stone. They were silent, utterly still, as though carved into the earth itself. His gut tightened instantly. Children. Alien children. Their forms were thin, skeletal almost, wrapped in tattered cloth that had been scorched at the edges. Their skin was pale silver, etched with faint glowing patterns that pulsed weakly, like embers struggling not to die. The older one, perhaps 9 or 10 human years, stared at him with dark, burning eyes, defiant even in her weakness. The younger clung to her sister, trembling, her lip quivering, as if she tried and failed to keep brave. Ronan's hand went automatically to his blade hilt before he realized how absurd it was. These were no raiders, no scouts, just two children lost in a world that would eat them alive. Yet his mind raced. 2 alien girls out here meant trouble. If the corporate patrols caught them, they'd be caged or dissected. He'd seen what science labs did to unregistered xeno bloodlines. If scavenger bands found them, it would be worse. He could turn away, pretend he never saw them. It wasn't his fight, but Ronan Hale had lived long enough to know what happened when people walked away from helpless souls. He still heard those ghosts in his sleep. He crouched slowly, lowering his lamp so its glow softened. His voice, when it came, was low and steady, though his heart hammered. "I'm not here to hurt you." The older child did not relax. Her thin arms tightened around her sister, shielding her. Her eyes never blinked. The younger whimpered softly but made no sound. Ronan unshouldered the canvas pack he carried and set it on a flat stone between them. He opened the flap carefully, movements deliberate, and laid out what little he had. 2 ration bars wrapped in foil, a dented flask of water, and a strip of dried jerky. He pushed it forward. "Take it," he murmured. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the older sister reached out, snatched the flask with trembling fingers, and pulled it back to share with the younger one. They drank greedily, coughing at first, then devoured the ration bars with frantic bites. The older one ate slower, forcing herself to leave more for her sister. Ronan stayed still, letting the storm lash behind him, his lamp flickering. Watching them, a strange weight pulled at his chest. He hadn't realized how empty his shelter had been until this moment. Until these fragile sparks of life reminded him what it meant to protect. When they finished, the older sister's eyes flicked to him. For a heartbeat, he thought she might speak. Instead, she gave a small, sharp nod, half gratitude, half warning. Then she pulled the younger one to her feet, and together they vanished into the darkness between the ridges. Ronan sat back, the cold rain beginning to pelt his shoulders. He almost called after them, but the words caught in his throat. The next morning, he returned to the same spot with another bundle of food and water. At first, he thought they hadn't come back. Then he saw it, a mark scratched into the dirt, a circle with a jagged line through it. Not human writing, but deliberate. A sign. He left the supplies and walked away. The day after, there was another mark, this one clearer. 2 interlocked lines glowing faintly with embedded crystal dust. The children had eaten everything. So it continued. Each evening he left something: bread, jerky, beans, even once a single apple he'd been saving for himself. Each morning, there was always a sign in the dirt that the children had come and gone. They never let him see them again, but he felt their eyes on him in the rocks, silent and watchful. Days passed. Their marks grew stronger, etched with confidence. Once the younger one had left a strip of thin crystal thread tied in a knot. Ronan turned it over in his palm, feeling the weight of it. It shimmered faintly even in the dim light. He slipped it into a tin and set it on the shelf by his bed. Then, one morning, they were gone. No sign of them, but the last mark rubbed out, the ground smooth as if they wanted no trace left. The space where their signs had been felt emptier than before, an ache he hadn't expected. He told himself they'd found their people. Or maybe not. He'd never know. But that night, for the first time in years, Ronan dreamed of something other than silence. He dreamed of 2 small shadows crouched under stone, waiting to be seen. 15 years passed like storms across the plains. Seasons carved lines into his face. Storms scarred the land, and time dulled his need to count days. He became broader, harder, his hair longer beneath a battered cap. His shelter grew sturdier, fences straight, water reserves deeper. Yet on the shelf above his bed still sat the tobacco tin, and inside, wrapped in worn cloth, was the strip of alien crystal thread, the only proof that someone once had needed him. Some nights he held it in his hands, turning it under the lamp's glow, wondering if the girls had survived. He imagined what they might look like grown, whether their eyes still burned with defiance, whether they carried scars of whatever had scattered their people. And each time he felt the same dull ache. He didn't know that fate was already turning back toward him. He didn't know the storm was coming again, and this time it would not leave him alone. The knock came in the storm, 2 shadows at his door, eyes like the ones he remembered, but grown, sharpened, and carrying danger with them. The storm rolled in from the western ridge just after sundown. Ronan Hale sat by the lantern light, sharpening the teeth of a broken mining saw. Rain hammered the polycrete roof in uneven bursts, a steady drumbeat that swallowed the silence he had grown used to. He didn't mind storms. On Vadris 9, storms reminded you that you were alive, that the world wanted to kill you but hadn't yet succeeded. He poured himself a tin cup of bitter synth coffee, listening to the hiss of water down the condenser tower outside. His gaze flicked, almost unconsciously, to the shelf by his bed. The small tin sat there, its lid worn smooth by years of touch. Inside, the alien thread still waited. 15 years, and still he kept it. 15 years, and still it whispered questions. He was lost in that thought when the sound came. 2 sharp knocks, not timid, not frantic, just deliberate. Ronan stiffened instantly. Nobody came this far out unless they had business or trouble. He slid the saw aside, his hand hovering near the rifle leaned against the wall. The storm masked most sounds, but he knew what he'd heard. The knock came again. Slow, he rose, boots creaking against the steel floor, and crossed to the door. He set his hand against the latch, heart thudding in a way that didn't match the rhythm of rain. The door slid open. Two figures stood framed against the storm. They were tall now, their bodies lean and strong beneath travel-worn cloaks. Rain streamed off their shoulders, running down the dark plates of strange exo-weave armor that clung to them like second skin. Their hair was bound in long braids, streaked with silver, their faces lit by the faint glow of markings along their cheekbones and throats. Recognition struck him like a blow. The tilt of the older one's jaw, the shape of the younger's eyes, the way she half-shielded herself behind her sister just as long ago. It was them, the children from the ridge. Only now they were women. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. 15 years of imagining what had become of them, and suddenly the answer was at his door. Alive, impossible, undeniable. He stepped back without a word. They entered, the storm following them like a shadow. The room filled with the scent of wet stone and charred ozone clinging to their cloaks. The older sister pulled something from her bundle, a small square of cloth. She laid it on his table, unfolding it with precise fingers. Inside lay a strip of crystal thread, woven and knotted in a pattern that shimmered faintly in the lantern glow. Ronan stared. Without thinking, he crossed the room, pulled the old tin from his shelf, and set it beside the new cloth. He opened it, hands unsteady, and laid his strip of thread beside theirs. The two pieces caught the light together, shining like echoes across years. The younger sister's gaze softened. The older one only nodded, sharp and deliberate, as if sealing a pact without words. The silence stretched. Ronan broke it first, voice rough. "You survived." The older sister's eyes lifted to his. They burned with the same defiance he remembered, though now honed by experience. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Instead, he fetched blankets from the bed and handed them over. His hands brushed against the younger's fingers for just an instant, and the contact sent a surprising warmth through him. He stoked the stove until the fire roared, filling the small room with heat. He set out bread and beans, the same way he had years before. They ate with the same quiet urgency, though now they tried not to show hunger as plainly. He watched them the way he had back then, silent, attentive, trying not to intrude, but unable to look away. The storm eased outside, leaving only the steady hiss of rain. Inside, the air grew warmer, heavier. Their cloaks steamed as they dried, the faint glow of their markings pulsing in rhythm with their breath. Ronan found his eyes drawn to details. The older sister, her braid tied with a strip of woven metal, shoulders straight, posture like a soldier. The younger, her hair loose and damp, her hands slender but scarred, her gaze darting with watchfulness. Questions pressed against his tongue. Where had they been? Why now? Who hunted them? But he said nothing. He knew better than to push. Later, when it was time to sleep, he unrolled his blanket on the floor and gestured toward the bed. The older sister watched him as he settled by the stove, her expression unreadable. Then, without speaking, she reached down with the edge of her blanket and covered his shoulder. Her hand lingered just long enough for him to feel its warmth before pulling away. He lay awake long into the night, listening to the rhythm of their breathing. He knew this wasn't a visit. Whatever had brought them here wasn't finished. And for the first time in years, he didn't mind the thought of sharing his roof. Dawn broke gray and cold. Mist clung to the wash like smoke. When Ronan rose, the sisters were already awake. The older stood near the stove, coaxing the embers back to life with the poker. The younger crouched by the table, folding the blanket she had used as though returning it borrowed. He watched them quietly, struck by the strangeness of it. Two alien women moving through his cabin as though they belonged there. For 15 years, the place had been only his. Now it breathed differently. He poured coffee, set the pot on the table, and studied them in the light. The older sister's cheekbones were sharp, not from hunger, but from hard travel. Calluses marked her palms, hands of a fighter. The younger's face was softer, her eyes wide but carrying the weight of caution learned too early. Both wore armor beneath their cloaks, scored with scorch marks and torn seams. They had seen war. When they ate, Ronan noticed how their knees brushed beneath the table, their movements synchronized without thought. He found himself looking at the younger sister longer than he should have, then forced his eyes away. After breakfast, he busied himself with chores, partly to keep moving, partly to think. He showed them the spring behind the ridge, expecting they'd stay back, but they followed without hesitation. The older carried both water pails with ease, her muscles flexing beneath damp fabric. The younger moved quietly, her gaze scanning the horizon with instinctive caution. Back at the shelter, she took his torn shirt from a peg without asking and began to mend it. Her fingers worked the needle quickly, her hair falling across her face. Ronan opened his mouth to tell her it wasn't necessary, then stopped, realizing she already knew, and chose to do it anyway. By midday, the cabin felt less like a hermit shelter and more like a place 3 people might actually live. The floor was swept, the table wiped, their damp cloaks hung by the stove. He tried to give them privacy, but the room was too small to avoid seeing the way the fabric clung to their bodies as it dried. The unspoken questions weighed heavier. Where had they been? Why return now? Yet each time he began to ask, he stopped. He knew pushing might break the fragile trust that had begun to form again. Instead, they sat together outside as the sun finally broke through the storm. The younger leaned against the wall, knees pulled up, watching his pen animals shuffle along the fence. The older sat forward, her eyes fixed on the distant road leading back toward town. "Someone looking for you?" Ronan asked quietly. The older didn't turn. Not anymore. Her tone was calm, but her jaw tightened just enough to make him believe otherwise. The younger glanced at her sister, then at him, and gave a small nod, as if to say they meant to stay. Whatever past hunted them, they weren't running anymore. That night, Ronan didn't take the floor. Instead, he spread his blanket closer to the bed, leaving space between, but not as far as before. The fire burned low, and in the dark, the younger sister's hand reached down, not to cover him this time, but to rest lightly on his arm, a wordless sign that they were no longer strangers. Ronan lay awake, staring at the ceiling beams, feeling the world shift around him. The cabin was too small now, the table too narrow. But for the first time in 15 years, he did not feel the weight of being alone. The first time he saw the corporate riders crest the ridge, he knew peace had ended. And for the first time in 15 years, he wasn't alone to face it. The third morning after their return began with stillness. The storm had finally passed. The sky stretched open, washed blue and clear. The sun lit the crystalline ridges so brightly they looked aflame. For once, Vadris 9 seemed almost calm. Ronan woke early, moving through familiar chores, checking the condenser towers, mending the pen fence, splitting dry crystal wood for the stove. Normally, these tasks were background noise, the rhythm of survival. But now he wasn't alone. The sisters moved through his shelter like they had always belonged. Vera, the older, took up heavy tasks without hesitation. She carried water pails, hauled stones, reinforced a loose panel on the roof as if the labor meant nothing. Serenia, the younger, worked with quieter hands. She stitched torn fabric, sorted tools, arranged supplies. Every motion precise, efficient, as though order itself was her weapon. Ronan caught himself watching them often, too often. When Serenia bent over the woodpile, her hair falling across her cheek. When Vera's shoulders flexed as she drove a stake into the ground. When their alien markings pulsed faintly in the sunlight, glowing like veins of starlight under their skin. He forced himself back to the fence, jaw tight. He'd lived alone too long to let distraction creep in. Yet it was there, undeniable. By midday, the shelter no longer felt like a hermit's refuge. It felt like something new, something fragile but alive. And then he saw the dust on the road. 4 riders crested the ridge. Their silhouettes were sharp against the horizon, their mounts kicking up red earth. Even from a distance, Ronan knew the type. Corporate enforcers, hired muscle dressed in worn coats, rifles slung across their backs. One wore a crooked deputy's badge, more for intimidation than authority. Ronan's stomach hardened. He set down the hammer, wiped his palms on his trousers, and walked slowly to the gate. The sisters noticed instantly. Vera straightened, her braid falling over one shoulder, her eyes narrowing. Serenia froze by the woodpile, her hands curling into fists. The riders slowed as they approached, horses snorting, dust clinging to their coats. The man with the badge called out first. "Morning, settler." His voice carried through the hot, still air. "Word is, you've got company." Ronan's jaw worked once. He didn't move from the gate. "Travelers come and go. No trouble here." The second rider leaned forward in his saddle. His grin was thin, his eyes cruel. "Funny thing, town says 2 alien women were seen heading this way. Illegal assets, property, technically. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" The words hit Ronan like acid. Property. Behind him, the shelter door creaked. Vera stepped out, arms crossed, chin high, her markings glowing faintly as the sunlight caught them. Serenia hovered just inside the doorway, one hand clutching the frame, eyes wide but steady. The riders' grins faltered. Ronan let the silence stretch before answering. His voice was flat, unshaken. "They're not wanted here, and they're not going anywhere." The deputy shifted in his saddle, eyes narrowing. "You sure about that?" "I'm sure." For a long moment, no one moved. The storm might as well have returned. Tension crackled in the air like lightning waiting to fall. Finally, the deputy gave a short nod. "If you see anything, you let the town know." They turned their horses and rode off, slow, dust trailing behind them. Ronan didn't move until the sound of hooves faded. Only then did he exhale, the knot in his chest loosening just slightly. Vera stepped closer, her shoulder brushing his. Her voice was low, steady. "They will return." "Maybe," Ronan answered. His eyes stayed fixed on the empty road. "But they'll find the same answer next time." Inside, Serenia finally let go of the doorframe. Her hands trembled, though she tried to hide it. Ronan crossed the room and laid a hand gently on her shoulder. She didn't flinch. For the first time, she gave him a faint smile. That night, he left the rifle by the door, not as a threat, more as a promise. He spoke aloud before turning in, more to himself than to them. "Door stays unlatched tonight." Vera glanced at him from where she braided her hair by the fire. She nodded once, slow and understanding. Serenia looked at him for a long moment, then let the faintest smile curve her lips. When he lay on the floor, he heard the bed creak as one of them shifted closer. The sound of their breathing, steady, near, kept the darkness from feeling so heavy. The following days blurred into tense rhythm. The sisters worked beside him, their presence reshaping everything. The shelter no longer felt temporary. It felt like something being built, piece by piece, into permanence. Vera reinforced the roof with crystal slag beams. She dragged herself from the ridge. Serenia stitched flour sacks into a curtain, giving privacy near the wash basin. Ronan expanded the pen, added a second condenser tower. Yet every task carried a shadow. Each morning, Ronan checked the horizon for dust, for riders. Each night, he kept the rifle within reach. Trouble was out there, circling, waiting. And then, on the 4th evening, it came. The storm of hooves rose with the dusk. 3 riders again, this time with a 4th. A man in a cleaner coat, his mustache clipped neat, boots polished. Corporate, no doubt. The kind who thought law was whatever he could buy. Ronan was already on the porch when they reined in at the gate. The deputy pushed his hat back, smirking. "Told you we'd be back." The man in the fine coat dismounted, eyes cold. "You can't keep unregistered assets here. They're dangerous. They belong to the corporation." Ronan didn't move. His voice was iron. "They belong to no one. This is their home. The corporate man sneered. You think you can hide them? There's law. Show me the papers. Ronan cut in. Silence, no papers came. Behind him, the cabin door opened. Vera stepped out, standing tall at his side, her braid loose, markings bright as fire. Serenia stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame, the other gripping a small blade. The sight of them together made the riders hesitate. The fine-coated man's jaw tightened. You're making a mistake, he said coldly. Maybe, Ronan's voice carried like stone. But it's mine to make. For a long moment, nothing. Then the deputy spat in the dust. We'll be back. They turned and rode off, their silhouettes swallowed by the horizon. The silence after was heavier than battle. Ronan stood rigid, pulse pounding. Only when he felt Vera's presence close did he exhale. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes, sharp, fierce, held something softer now. Serenia crossed the room, took the rifle from where he'd set it, and leaned it against the door at a sharper angle. Ready. Her small nods said it all. They would not run. That night, when they ate together, it felt less like a meal and more like an agreement. Days passed, the threat hanging thicker. The sisters spoke more now, though in fragments. Vera's words were firm, practical, shaped like orders. Serenia's voice was softer, carrying questions, small jokes, quick laughter that startled Ronan every time. One afternoon, while mending the fence, Serenia slipped on wet ground. Ronan caught her around the waist, steadying her before she fell. For a moment she leaned against him, her heart beat quick beneath his hands. She looked back at him over her shoulder, not startled, just watching. Then she stepped forward slowly, saying nothing. That evening, as the sun bled behind the ridge, Serenia brought him a cup of coffee. Her hand brushed his. Neither of them moved right away. Vera stood nearby, silent, watching. For a heartbeat, Ronan thought he'd see anger. Instead, she stepped forward, laid a hand on his jaw, and searched his face. Then she kissed him, slow and steady, as if marking him with her approval. Serenia followed, hesitant but certain, her lips soft against his. No words were spoken. The lantern burned low. Their knees touched beneath the table. And for the first time since the sisters had returned, Ronan felt the truth settle inside him. This was no accident. This was destiny, returned from the storm. And he would fight for it, no matter the cost. They came with rifles and machines, expecting fear. What they found was a human who refused to break, and two alien sisters whose blood remembered war. The dust rose before noon. Ronan had felt it coming all morning. The air was too still, the horizon too quiet. Even the pen animals shifted nervously, their hooves scraping the fence. He stood by the ridge, eyes narrowed, scanning the flat line of the horizon. And then he saw it. Not 4 riders this time. A convoy. 3 crawler trucks armored with welded plates. At least a dozen riders on hoverbikes flanking them. Dust plumes trailing like banners of war. Above, the faint buzz of drones shimmered in the sun. Sleek black machines, wings glinting like razors. Corporate had returned, and this time they weren't asking questions. He turned back toward the shelter. Vera was already strapping the plates of her exo-armor tighter across her shoulders, her braids swinging down her back. The faint glow of her markings pulsed brighter, spreading across her throat and arms like living fire. Serenia stood beside her, gripping a crystal-forged blade, her eyes wide but steady. They come in numbers, Vera said flatly. I counted 15, Ronan answered. His voice was calm, though his chest tightened. Maybe more. Serenia's gaze flicked to him. We cannot outrun them. No, Ronan agreed. He picked up his rifle from the wall, slamming a fresh shard cartridge into place. We fight. Vera's lips curved into the faintest, fiercest smile. At last, the first shots came as the convoy slowed on the ridge. Plasma bolts hissed into the dirt, scorching the ground near the fence. Ronan crouched behind the wall, sighting down his rifle. He squeezed the trigger. A shard burst from the chamber, slamming through the chest plate of a rider, throwing him from his hoverbike. The fight had begun. The drones swooped low, their sensors glowing red. Serenia stepped forward, lifted her hands, and the markings along her arms flared. A piercing hum filled the air, vibrating deep into Ronan's bones. The nearest drone shuddered, its wings stuttering. With a shriek of metal, it spiraled into the ground, exploding in sparks. Ronan stared for half a breath. "You didn't tell me you could do that." Serenia's lips curved faintly. "You never asked." Then she turned back, unleashing another pulse that shattered a second drone midair. Vera was already moving. She vaulted the fence with inhuman speed, her blade flashing with arcs of blue light. She struck a rider from his bike, carving through steel and bone as if both were cloth. Plasma fire seared past her, but she twisted aside, her body blurring for an instant, markings blazing. Ronan covered her, firing shot after shot, every recoil slamming into his shoulder. One rider fell, then another, but there were too many. The convoy truck screeched to a halt, armored doors slamming open. Mercenaries poured out, rifles leveled. The battle exploded into chaos. The sisters moved like predators out of myth. Vera's strikes were brutal, precise, her body an extension of her weapon. Serenia's resonance shattered weapons, sent men staggering, blood running from their ears. Ronan fought like a man who had nothing left to lose, and suddenly everything to protect. He shifted positions, fired until the rifle overheated, then grabbed his old mining saw and swung it into a merc's chest, sparks flying. Plasma bolts seared the wall of his shelter, igniting part of the roof. Ronan's gut twisted. He couldn't let them burn the only home left to him. "Serenia!" he shouted. She turned, eyes glowing. He pointed at the roof. Without hesitation, she thrust her hands forward. The resonance rippled outward, a visible shockwave. The flames snuffed out instantly, smoke rising into the sky. Ronan grinned despite himself. "Remind me not to make you angry." She flushed faintly, then cut another drone from the air. The fight raged on. For every merc that fell, two more seemed to push forward. They circled the shelter, cutting off escape. Vera was driven back toward the door, blood streaking down her arm where a plasma bolt had grazed her. Serenia staggered, her resonance faltering, her face pale. Ronan knew they couldn't hold much longer. Then the corporate man appeared. He climbed down from the lead truck, his coat immaculate despite the dust, his polished boots untouched by the fight. In his hand he carried a shock baton, its end crackling with electric arcs. His smile was thin, cruel. "Oh, enough!" he called over the chaos, his voice carried like a knife. "Stand down, hand over the assets, and I'll let you crawl away with your skin." Ronan stepped forward, chest heaving, sweat running down his brow. He raised his rifle and spat into the dirt. "They're not assets." His voice was iron. "They're my family." The corporate man's smile vanished. "Then you'll die with them." He raised the baton. The mercenaries surged. The world blurred into blood and fire. Ronan fought until his arms screamed, every muscle burning. A plasma bolt grazed his shoulder, searing flesh. He bit back the pain, swung his saw into another merc's chest. Vera roared, her markings blazing brighter than ever, her blade cutting through armor as if it were paper. She moved to Ronan's side, covering his flank, her breathing ragged but unbroken. Serenia faltered, falling to one knee. A merc closed in, rifle aimed at her head. Ronan didn't think. He threw himself forward, slamming into the merc with all his weight, grappling for the weapon. The rifle discharged, burning a line across Ronan's side, but he ripped it free and smashed it into the man's jaw. Serenia looked up at him, eyes wide, tears cutting through dust. "You'll die for us." Ronan pulled her to her feet, his hand gripping hers. "No, I'll live for you." Her markings flared, brighter than ever. And then it happened. The two crystal threads, hers and his, shone at once. The tin on the table inside the shelter cracked open, the threads glowing like molten silver. They lifted into the air, twisting together, binding. Ronan felt a jolt deep in his chest, as though something ancient had chosen, sealed, claimed. The sisters gasped. Their markings flared across their entire bodies, brighter than the sun. The bond had awakened. Serenia pressed her hand to his chest over his racing heart. Vera stepped close, her palm against his shoulder. Their voices overlapped, alien and human. One word echoing through the storm of battle. Bond mate! The resonance exploded outward. The mercenaries staggered as shockwaves tore through them, weapons shattering, drones falling from the sky. The ground itself quaked beneath their feet. The corporate man dropped his baton, his face twisted in shock as the wave hurled him backward into the dust. The battlefield fell silent. Only the sound of Ronan's breathing, the sisters' glow, and the crackle of fading plasma filled the air. When the dust settled, the mercenaries fled. The convoy trucks sputtered to life, retreating down the road. The corporate man screamed promises of return, but his words were drowned by the roar of engines fading into distance. Ronan stood in the center of the yard, chest heaving, his shirt scorched and torn. Serenia clung to his arm, her face buried against him. Vera stood on his other side, her blade dripping with alien ichor, her eyes burning with pride. The bond still pulsed between them, alive, undeniable. Ronan looked at them both, his throat tight. It's done. They won't take you. Not while I stand. Serenia lifted her face, her eyes glowing faintly, tears gleaming in the light. You are ours now. Vera's lips curved into a sharp, fierce smile. And we are yours. Ronan exhaled, the weight of years finally breaking. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel alone. He felt unbreakable. That night, the three of them sat together at the table. The crystal threads laid between them, glowing faintly in rhythm with their hearts. There were no speeches, no declarations. Only the fire's crackle, their hands touching. And the silent vow that whatever came next, mercenaries, corporations, the whole damn galaxy, they would face it together. They had come for property. They left hearing the truth, that humanity was more than law, more than fear, that one man's choice could reshape destiny. The days after the battle passed in uneasy quiet. The mercenaries had retreated, their trucks swallowed by the horizon. But Ronan knew it wasn't over. Men like that didn't give up. They regrouped, they schemed, they returned with more. He woke earlier now, checking the road before dawn. He oiled his rifle twice a day. He patched every weak seam of the shelter. Yet for all the weight pressing on him, he did not feel hollow. Because now, when he turned back from the ridge, he saw them. Vera, sleeves rolled, grinding corn at the stone basin, her muscles flexing with every push. Serenia crouched by the woodpile, sorting kindling into neat rows, her soft hum filling the air. Their presence filled the shelter with life he had long forgotten. It smelled of firewood, bread baking, and something deeper, belonging. By the third morning, Ronan decided, the cabin is too small, he said, nodding at the cramped space where the cot and table crowded the stove. If we're to live here, we'll make more room. He brought out the good planks he'd been saving for years, smoothing them with a plane. Vera helped lift the beams into place, her strength steady as steel. Serenia sanded the board smooth, her fingers brushing sawdust away with delicate care. By evening, a new table stood in the center of the room. Bigger, stronger, built for three. When they sat to eat at it that night, their knees no longer had to touch. But none of them sat far apart. Ronan poured coffee, then opened the tin, laying the old strip of crystal thread beside the new one the sisters had brought. The two glowed faintly in the lantern light, their patterns almost singing when placed together. Serenia reached across the table, resting her hand on his. Vera nodded once, slow and deliberate, as if sealing an oath. For the first time in 15 years, Ronan felt the weight in his chest lift. The peace did not last. Dust rose again on the road, more than before. This time, 6 riders led by the same man in the fine coat. He carried no grin now, only the hard look of someone who meant to end things. They reined in at the gate, weapons glinting. The deputy spat into the dirt. "We warned you. You harbor fugitives. That makes you enemy of the colony." Ronan stepped forward, planting himself in the gate's opening. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned. "This is their home. They are not fugitives. They are mine, and I'll stand against any man who says otherwise." The corporate man sneered. "You think you can fight the law?" "No," Ronan said. His voice carried steady, like iron driven into stone. "I fight for family." The sisters appeared behind him. Vera stood to his left, braid loose, her blade glowing faintly with its inner light. Serenia stood to his right, markings alive across her skin, her hand brushing Ronan's arm. The riders shifted uneasily. The deputy muttered, "This is madness." The corporate man's face twisted. "They'll break you. All bonds break." Serenia's voice cut through clear and ringing. "Not this one." The bond flared again. The threads on the table inside the shelter lifted into the air, spinning, fusing into a single woven band of light. It drifted through the open door, settling across Ronan's chest, binding him to the sisters with a glow that pulsed like a heartbeat. The riders stared, pale. Vera stepped forward, her hand pressed to Ronan's shoulder. "We choose him." Serenia pressed her palm over his heart. "And he chooses us." Their voices overlapped, ancient and fierce. "Bondmate, for life." The resonance surged outward in a wave. The riders' mounts reared, drones faltered, engines sputtered. The corporate man staggered back, fear flashing in his eyes. He pointed, shouting, "This isn't over! You'll hang for this!" But his words held no weight. His men were already retreating, pulling their mounts around, fleeing down the road. The fine-coated man followed last, his glare burning over his shoulder. But even he turned away, swallowed by the dust. Silence fell. Ronan stood with the sisters at his side, the glow of the bond still warm on his chest. His heart hammered, but not from fear. He looked at them. Vera steady, fierce as stone. Serenia soft, eyes shining with tears. He felt the truth settle deeper than bone. He was theirs, they were his. Whatever storms came, whatever armies followed, they would not face them apart. That night they lit the lantern and sat at the new table. The bond thread lay across it, glowing faintly with the rhythm of three hearts beating as one. There were no speeches, no grand vows, only silence, firelight, and hands entwined. When they lay down to sleep, the door was left unlatched. Not in defiance now, not in fear, but in belonging. At dawn, Ronan stepped outside, the sisters beside him. The sun rose over the crystalline ridges, washing the land in gold. For years he had seen the world as empty stone and dust. Now it looked different, alive. Vera stood tall, her hand resting on the hilt of her blade. Serenia leaned against him, her hair brushing his shoulder. Ronan breathed deep. The horizon stretched endless before them, full of threats, full of promise. He didn't care. 15 years ago, he had given food to 2 starving children. Now they had given him something greater. A reason to fight. A reason to live. A reason to love. And nothing, not law, not corporations, not the void itself, would ever take that away. Final line. The world called them fugitives. He called them family. And together they would write a future no one could break.